What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Thursday, January 4th, 2018 here. Sure happy it's Thursday, sure happy it's Thursday, sure happy it's Thursday. We have got a lot of stuff to talk about today. A lot of stuff going on. It's 2018 is already starting to turn out to look like a very interesting year politically, and a lot of it comes down to focus on the classified emails that were found on Anthony Weiner's laptop and the revelation that Huma Abedin was sending her State Department computer passwords through unsecured email, her private email account. And so basically, Tom Fitton is out there saying, our Weiner laptop find shows need for criminal investigation of Abedin Clinton classified info mishandling. I think we may be at a tipping point. He may be right. But I'm not going to get out the champagne just yet here, because if I am correct as to what was really going on with that email server, then you can expect a huge faction fight within the government to keep this thing from going any further. And it's the kind of faction fight that can literally tear governments apart. And the more I look at what's going on inside the Beltway, it does seem like there's a lot of fractures that are forming right now. So Huma Abedin, again, when the FBI was investigating, and I use that word loosely, the email server scandal, Huma Abedin was never interrogated by the FBI, just interviewed, and her laptop computer, the one she got after she gave her old one to Anthony Weiner, was simply destroyed. Remember that bizarre set of deals that came on out for immunity deals, and the FBI was not going to look at anything on those computers past the date when the story went public, so that anything the Clinton and Huma Abedin were doing to try and obstruct justice was outside the FBI scope. The whole thing was totally corrupt from top to bottom. And this article I'm looking at in AmericaOutloud.com, the paragraph ends with a notable quote: "The depth of Hillary's protection is breathtaking," and yes, it is. And that is why I am convinced that the real scandal of the email server is still being hidden from the American people. And that, of course, I mean, is talking about Hillary replaying that 1996 Chinagate scandal, selling America's secrets to foreign interests in exchange for campaign donations. It was called Chinagate back in 1996. There was an investigation, but it went nowhere because, golly, critical evidence was accidentally lost and deleted, blah, blah, blah. We've heard it all again. Apparently, Attorney General Jeff Sessions is responding to all the pressure from the White House, pressure from the public, the fact that once again, classified information is found in places it ought not to be, Title 18 violations. And so Justice Department officials are going to take a fresh look at Hillary Clinton's email server. Now, I wouldn't get excited just yet, because we know all too often a government investigation is just another taxpayer-funded process to polish up the existing lies. And we're already hearing the Comey defense. Hillary and Abedin didn't mean to do anything wrong. They were being careless. But if you read Title 18, intent is not required. It is the actual act of exposing classified information to foreign sources that is the crime, not what you meant to do. And here is where it gets kind of sticky for Huma Abedin. She sent her State Department computer passwords through non-secure mail to her non-secure computer. And apparently that computer was indeed hacked by Russians working with that same bank that eventually gave Bill Clinton $500,000 for a single speech. And that means no Russians hacked the State Department computers. They just logged in. Now, Jason Chaffetz is out there calling for Jeff Sessions to resign, and I agree. If the Department of Justice is going to do an honest investigation of Hillary's email server, if the American people are ever going to trust anything coming out of the Department of Justice, Sessions has to go. And Jason Chavez says, I do believe it's time for the Attorney General Sessions to go. There are major systemic problems within the Department of Justice that get talked about on an almost daily basis. I don't think the Attorney General is up to that job. Sessions may be up to the job. The problem is his job is keeping the lid on the scandals that can bring down the entire government. That's what's going on there. I want Larry Klayman in there, or Tom Fitton, or Alan Favish. Let's get them in there. These are investigative attorneys that do the job, and they're nonpartisan. They go after the corrupt politicians on both sides of the aisle. We need new blood in all of Washington, D.C. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Now, congressional investigators, in fact, a couple of these committees say they've uncovered more contradictions and irregularities inside the FBI probe of Hillary Clinton's email server. They're getting these from Comey, Strzok, McCabe, and again, in keeping an eye on the overall. The FBI kept the Hillary Clinton investigation at that very top level. No lower-level FBI agents were allowed to make any decisions about it whatsoever. And we now know they were preparing to exonerate Hillary even before the investigation was over, even before critical evidence had been reviewed. Now, in the end, Comey did not technically exonerate Hillary Clinton. Exoneration is when somebody gets up and says, you're innocent of the charges you were accused of. All Comey said was, she's guilty of Title 18 violations, but we choose not to prosecute. And former Attorney General Loretta Lynch agreed. That's not really an exoneration. Those charges are still out there, those Title 18 violations. Hillary can still be prosecuted for that, and she ought to be. Right now, the credibility of the FBI, the credibility of the Department of Justice, the credibility of the entire federal government is on the line. The American people are watching. The world is watching what's going to happen here. Now, some of the information that's coming on out are talking about just a huge flow of classified information that went out to Hillary Clinton's email server. And, of course, following the subpoena by Congress, she deleted those 30,000 emails, insisted they were all private, family matter, and poof, it's gone. The backups disappeared. For some strange reason, the NSA didn't have it. But apparently lower FBI officials looking at the volume of classified information that was pouring out of the State Department onto Hillary's weak private email server were convinced laws had been broken, that criminal activity was going on. Now, apparently, one of these congressional committees is trying to find the identity of a witness. It's been redacted from the FBI documents. So the FBI is hiding things from members of Congress. But lawmakers have pretty much figured out he was an employee of a computer firm that helped maintain her personal server after she left office as America's top diplomat, and belatedly admitted that he had permanently erased an archive backup of her messages in 2015 after they had been subpoenaed by Congress. Don't you get tired of hearing about this? Oh, the hard drive failed, the backups were destroyed. Well, gee, we're sorry, the server farm burnt down, the dog ate my data. Congressional investigators say the FBI had found that the sheer volume of classified information was received and sent from the non-secure private server. That's just it. And I reposted my article, Hillary the Spy, to the front page of whatreallyhappened.com. You need to go back and look at that. That gives you the backstory on Chinagate and the early story of the email server. And I'm convinced. I'm looking for more evidence. I'm convinced that's what Hillary was doing. 40% of the money that poured into the Clinton Foundation came from foreign sources. There was the hacker called himself Guccifer, and he reported that when he was inside Hillary's private email server, he saw at least 10 foreign IPs logged in. Hillary's private email server had weaker security than Ashley Madison, which turned out to be a big joke. Now, Chuck Grassley is on the warpath against former FBI Director Comey, saying that Comey leaked classified information. And basically what it was is shortly after he was fired as the FBI Director, James Comey forwarded on material to Professor Richman. And basically Richman was the one who then moved forward saying that there's a need for an investigation into Russia and so forth, along with many other voices. But apparently, Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley has written a letter to Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein demanding answers about the handling of memos that Comey wrote following his conversations with President Trump, which contained classified information. And so Professor Richman was given classified information for which he did not have the appropriate security clearance. Everybody's playing fast and loose with all of this. The classified information, it's the coin of the realm. It's something of value. Let's find a buyer. The White House is starting to look like storage wars out there. They break open the lock and they sell off everything that's inside to the highest bidder. Story out of Fox News. Even Fox News is getting on this. The FBI cleared Clinton before getting key evidence. And apparently, congressional investigators have written documentation showing the FBI was going to do this. No matter what the FBI found, they were going to clear her. Now, do you really think that everybody at the FBI loves Hillary Clinton? No, they're protecting a bigger secret, one that could bring down the entire government. That's the only thing that explains this incredible depth of protection around Hillary Clinton. She has done something that could destroy Americans' trust and confidence in the federal government completely and utterly. And they're all scared for their jobs. Now, as you know, the Democrats, and for that matter, the corporate media, had pinned their hopes of bringing down Donald Trump on this whole Trump-Russia collusion issue. And it's fallen apart. There's nothing there. After an entire year, millions of dollars, Robert Mueller found nothing. And so the New York Times is trying to change the narrative. And basically, the first original narrative that was pushing Trump-Russia collusion focused on Carter Page, who was called a foreign policy advisor by the Times last April. And that story claimed that a June 2016 visit by Page to Moscow was the catalyst for the FBI investigation into connections between Russia and President Trump's campaign. And, of course, Page denied any collusion took place. And serious intelligence officials noted that the Russian assets, far better than Page, were in place to have reached out to the Trump campaign if, in fact, there was going to be any collusion. So fast forward to the New Year's weekend, and the Times ran another lengthy, breathless story saying, no, it wasn't Carter Page who touched off the FBI investigation. It was an even lower-level Trump campaign associate named George Papadopoulos. And people are scratching their heads and wondering, why is the Times changing the story this far after the fact? And basically, it looks like the Times is an effort, the Times story, the change, is to help Democrats cover up the use of the bogus Trump dossier to secure a FISA warrant. Because that basically is fraud. It's perjury. When you go to swear out a warrant, you're required to swear under oath the allegations are true. And so they're trying to distance themselves away from that. Now, a little bit of good news. President Donald Trump was sued by a liberal advocacy group, Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, shortly after the inauguration. And the issue of the lawsuit was that Trump's owning of properties that were being rented by foreign officials doing business with the government violated the emoluments clause, even though all of Trump's holdings are now in a trust under the control of his sons. And finally, again, the liberals were breathlessly out there saying this will bring him down. Trump is ineligible to be president because of all of this. The case just got thrown out of court. And even more interesting, the judge that threw the case out was appointed by President Clinton. So the liberals can't go out there screaming, oh, it's another corrupt GOP judge. Now, getting on back to Robert Mueller's investigation, former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort has now filed lawsuit against Robert Mueller, Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, and the entire Department of Justice in U.S. federal court, alleging that Mueller strayed beyond the scope of the investigation he was authorized to pursue. And yes, he did. Mueller was supposed to investigate Trump-Russia collusion, not just go off on fishing expeditions until they could find anything that would result in an indictment. And Manafort's suit also alleges that the order appointing Mueller exceeds the Deputy Attorney General's authority and that all actions taken by the special counsel must be set aside. I'm fully in agreement. More about this when we come back. Aloha America, welcome back to our show here. And again, the address if you want to support Republic Broadcasting, and believe me, we would not ask if we did not need it, is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. The phone number, if you want to become a regular subscriber to Republic Broadcasting, is 800-724-2719, extension 03. So we're talking about the fact that Paul Manafort is suing Robert Mueller, Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, and the Department of Justice, saying that Mueller's indictments are outside the scope of his original investigation, and that all actions taken by the special counsel must be set aside, meaning the indictments be quashed. Now, if he gets a halfway decent, honest judge, he's probably going to win this lawsuit because Rod Rosenstein actually violated the special counsel statute, because the special counsel statute says there must first be a Department of Justice investigation, and only when that investigation finds actual evidence of wrongdoing is a special counsel appointed to pursue the matter. That didn't happen. Rosenstein simply came on in and said to Mueller, go look for evidence that Russia and Trump were colluding in last year's election. So I'm glad Paul is suing. He's got a good chance of winning, because basically Mueller unlawfully exceeded his authority. Now, the Department of Justice is claiming this is a frivolous lawsuit, but Paul Manafort can file whatever he wants to file, which is the usual sort of statement you'll get. Now, as you know, there's been a little bit of a fight between Devin Nunes and the Department of Justice, between the House Intelligence Committee and the Department of Justice, over documents and witnesses, and the Department of Justice has been withholding from Congress this material and these witnesses, which they're not allowed to do. Congress has oversight. The House Intelligence Committee, these various committees, they have oversight. These agencies are answerable to them. Well, apparently the Department of Justice has capitulated, and Devin Nunes has issued a statement saying that all the documents, everything that has been requested, along with these witnesses, will be made available to the House Intelligence Committee. Now, let's talk about Steve Bannon, because obviously he's getting a lot of news coverage today, and a lot of people are wondering, what the heck is going on? And apparently it has to do with a book that is about to come out, maybe, in which there are a lot of quotes by Steve Bannon that really, they're not very good. And the book is called Fire and Fury. It's written by Michael Wolff, and it's a very negative portrait of the Trump White House after the first year. And apparently Donald Trump was very incensed over Bannon's comment that a 2016 meeting with a Russian lawyer was treason. Now, the lawyer in question approached Donald Trump Jr. and some of the other people over the Magnitsky Act. There was no talk about the campaign, no talk about Hillary. That's a dead issue. And yet Michael Wolff apparently was willing to put this in the book. So Trump just launched on Steve Bannon. And it's been described as running him over with a tank and then backing up. And Trump came on out and said when Bannon was fired, he not only lost his job, he lost his mind. Mitch McConnell is out there saying that he supports President Trump's blistering attack on Stephen Bannon. And Bannon has repeatedly lashed out at McConnell, so this is payback time. Bannon has called for McConnell's resignation, predicting he would lose his spot in the Senate leadership despite wide support from the caucuses. So there's been a war of words there. Surprisingly, today, Steve Bannon himself is out there making very supportive comments of Trump. Okay, last night, came on out and called Trump a great man, saying, I support him day in and day out. This was on a Breitbart satellite radio show, and a subsequent headline on the Breitbart website said, Bannon takes the high road. So everybody's trying to figure out what the heck is going on. Was Bannon just spouting off into a tape recorder? It's hard to believe that one because Bannon is an experienced media person. He knows there's really no such thing as off the record. Is Bannon basically trying to bring the Trump White House down himself because we didn't get the Trump that we all voted for? Maybe. But he may be making nice with Trump now because ardent support for Trump is central to the Breitbart brand. More about that when we come back. Aloha America, welcome back to our show. And we're talking about Steve Bannon and this book, Fire and Fury, that has come on out. And by the way, the book is not out yet, but it's being excerpted in newspapers all over the world. And I have to tell you right now, some of the claims they're making about Trump's behavior do not pass the smell test. For one thing, Michael Wolff apparently was talking to lower-level people who are around the White House. And the White House has already come on out and said the book is a fiction, and that Wolff didn't really talk to anybody who's actually close to the president. And when I read the first excerpts, I said, no, it doesn't feel right. My gut is telling me it's part of the propaganda campaign to get Trump out of office this year. Setting that aside, everybody's wondering what happened with Steve Bannon. Michael Wolff is claiming he's got audio tape on all the interviews that went into the book, and so supposedly he can back up the quotes that he ascribes to Steve Bannon. So why is Bannon last night, after Trump's broadside against him, saying he's a great man and I support him and making nice like that? Part of it may be that the Breitbart brand that is heavily invested in support for Trump. He can't turn on the president without wrecking his own media empire. So why did he make the comments in the book? Or maybe the Bannon's statements were basically the public statement of Breitbart. Steve Bannon was speaking as Breitbart, not as Steve Bannon. But it is very weird to see. Meanwhile, President Trump's lawyers have sent a cease and desist letter to former White House Chief Strategist Steve Bannon, ordering him from refraining from making disparaging statements about Trump and his family. And apparently, the gist of the lawsuit is that Bannon is now accused of breaching a non-disclosure agreement signed as part of working on Trump's campaign. So let's talk about Steve Bannon and Breitbart, because Matt Drudge is dropping hints that the future of Breitbart does not include Steve Bannon. And I'm sure we'll find out what's really going on in the next 24 hours, but there's a lot of hue and cry for Breitbart to let Bannon go, including from the White House itself. Now, Steve Bannon, of course, was backing a lot of Senate hopefuls for this year's midterm elections, and they're already starting to pull away. They're distancing away. He's turned into political poison all of a sudden. And apparently, the Wall Street Journal is quoting a part of the book where Bannon described Ivanka Trump as dumb as a brick. It's hard to see what's really going on. Anyway, getting on back to the book itself, it's called Fire and Fury Inside the Trump White House. It was written by Michael Wolff, who had apparently some access to the administration. And it's not even out yet. It contains more than 200 interviews with the president. And according to this article, he did interview in the inner circle. But again, reading some of the quotes that were already out in the newspapers, it just doesn't feel right to me. It doesn't feel real. Now, obviously, I'm going to have to get a copy of the book and read the whole thing. But what was out there about Trump's personal behavior toward his subordinates, it doesn't match with what we know about Trump from before the campaign. Even more amazingly, Wolff is claiming that Trump actually intended to lose, that he just wanted to run for president to increase his stature, and that he'd actually promised Melania that he was going to lose, and that's why Melania remained in New York. I'm having a hard time buying that one either. Trump years ago was talking about being the president so much. It doesn't sound like it was just a joke or a gag. And again, as disappointed as I am in Trump with his military agenda, I'm still glad he won. I'm still glad Hillary Clinton is not the president, because things would be a lot worse. As bad as they are right now, they'd be a lot worse. And this is a preliminary opinion until I get the book and read it. But this does feel like part of this propaganda campaign to get Trump out of office, to just demonize him, while the Democrats try and get him out through impeachment or the 25th Amendment. Now, Trump's legal team is trying to block the release of the book. They're basically threatening libel lawsuits against the publisher based on the excerpts that have already been published. The White House is saying the excerpts already published are untrue, and they're threatening the publisher with libel. Now, there is no way they can go to court and get a judge to order the publisher not to release the book. That would violate the prior restraint issues. But apparently, Trump's legal team is basically trying to bluff the publisher into voluntarily withholding the book on the theory that the libel lawsuit settlements will exceed any profits the publisher might make from the book. Now, only just yesterday I was talking about Trump's voter fraud commission and why we weren't hearing anything from it and what was going on. And today we're getting word that Trump has ordered the voter fraud commission dissolved. Now, it's not that he wants election fraud. He knows he's going to face it. He knows the Republicans will face it this November. He knows he'll face it again in 2020. But apparently the problem was that all of the states were refusing to cooperate with the Voter Fraud Commission. They were going to court. They were filing lawsuits. It was a classic case of lawfare. Just try and tangle everything up in the court system so that nobody could move. And so Trump basically came on out and said, rather than engage in endless legal battles at taxpayer expense, today I signed an executive order to dissolve the commission and have asked the Department of Homeland Security to review these issues and to determine the next courses of action. I don't have any confidence the Department of Homeland Security will look at this either. But Trump has again tweeted, the system is rigged and we must go to voter ID. I agree with that. And we have to get rid of those electronic machines and counting centers and crowdsource the process. And I have an article, if you go to whatreallyhappened.com, up at the top, right underneath my picture. It says how to have honest elections. And it describes a system that makes election fraud very, very hard to commit and very, very hard to conceal. In contrast with our current system, which seems designed to facilitate and then conceal massive election fraud. The roadblock that we face on this is that any laws at the federal level to reform the election system have to go through Congress. And if enough members of Congress are in Congress because of the current fraudulent election system, they won't vote it through. So we're kind of stuck there. Now, people have been writing into me talking about these little commercials, these little begs that Republic Broadcasting and What Really Happened do for money. And it is a real issue because we've just gotten word today that Red Flag News is having to close their doors. They've been a fellow traveler on the road to restoring the Republic, and they, like so many other fellow travelers, are now going to have to pass into history. It's kind of a death in the family. And it is a reminder, this is a real war between the corruption and the independent media trying to expose that corruption. And we've scored a lot of victories. I don't think we would be here with the Department of Justice reopening the investigation into Hillary's email server, however bogus that new investigation may be, if it wasn't for massive public pressure coming from Americans who are now getting their political news from the independent media, from Republic Broadcasting, from What Really Happened. Now, apparently, and this is in response to all the brouhaha about what went on with Hillary Clinton and personal electronic devices, but apparently White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders has relayed a message directed at both guests and staff that personal electronic devices will no longer be allowed inside of the West Wing at all. It's a ban on cell phones, tablets, laptops, everything. Staff will conduct business on their government-issued devices only. I think it's a good idea, especially when you realize how many people can get into these cell phones remotely. Now, let's get into the international news and the wars, emphasis on the plural. Let's talk about Iran. A couple of different views about it. Over at Global Research, they've got a story, Global Warfare, Preparing for World War III, targeting Iran, and basically commenting on the fact that very quickly it was obvious that the sudden explosion of rioting, violent protests in Iran is another outside-sponsored attempt at a regime change. And this article ends by saying that the medium-term strategic objective is to target Iran and neutralize Iran's allies through gunboat diplomacy. The longer-term military objective is to directly target China and Russia. That would be extraordinarily dangerous, to say the least. Now, there's another point of view from FortRuss.com saying that no, in point of fact, the goal of all these protests is not regime change, but to force the EU to put more sanctions on Iran because of the way Iran is responding to the violent protests. But as Russia has already pointed out, certainly the United States has no place to stand on that, given how the U.S. cracked down on Occupy Wall Street and Ferguson. Now, one of the reasons they're having tough economic times in Iran is because of existing sanctions. And remember, the P5+1 deal, which Iran is fully in compliance with, and the IAEA keeps confirming that over and over again, part of the deal was the United States would lift all of their sanctions on Iran. And the United States not only did not lift all of the previous sanctions, they added more. Congress voted them through to just punish Iran, just for the sake of punishing Iran. And if, in fact, Fort Russ is correct, and this whole violent protests requiring Iranian response is to get the EU to throw more sanctions on there, then the goal is the economic collapse of Iran. Meanwhile, however, the news from Iran itself is that whatever the objective of this, it seems to be fizzling. There have been huge marches in support of the government and Khamenei, far, far larger than the economic protests and much larger than the violent protests. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is saying that the violent protests are already winding down. They're fizzling out. The people who are fomenting the violence don't really have the commitment to stay there. And a big reason why it may be starting to come apart, again, as we reported yesterday, an unidentified European citizen has been arrested trying to fan up the violent protest and was arrested in Iran's Borzherd County. This is in western Iran. And apparently Iran intelligence is saying that this individual has been trained by European intelligence services and was leading the rioters. Now, the nationality and identity have yet to be disclosed. Apparently, back in Syria, the U.S.-backed terrorists aren't giving up, and apparently they're still somehow being supplied. Russian forces suffered casualties in Khmeimim shelling. This is the Syrian Arab Army, the National Defense Forces, the Tiger Forces, and other pro-government factions, supported by the Russian Aerospace Forces, have achieved notable progress against Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, formerly Jabhat al-Nusra. They keep changing their names over there. This is supposedly the Syrian branch of al-Qaeda in southern Idlib. So they're gaining ground there, but apparently they are meeting some stiff opposition. Now, as you know, Trump came out the other day and he tweeted out comments about Pakistan, about how the United States has given Pakistan more than $33 billion in aid over the last 15 years to fight terror, and the U.S. is not satisfied with Pakistan's progress in that area. Trump claiming that we've got nothing in return for the $33 billion but lies and deceit. So it's a little inflammatory, and I think Trump would have been well advised to tone it down a bit, but then we don't know the advice Trump is getting. Most of it seems to be very, very bad. Pakistan is now talking of a response to U.S. actions. They're not saying exactly what it's going to be, but they're making it very clear that they cannot let this one pass. And remember, as we reported yesterday, Pakistan has now reached a deal with China for direct trade using the yuan and not the dollar. Now, Pakistan's foreign minister, Khwaja Asif, on Wednesday said history has taught them not to blindly trust the United States in response to statements from top U.S. officials accusing Islamabad of providing safe haven to militants fighting in war-torn Afghanistan. And in this case, Pakistan's foreign minister is absolutely correct. The recent history, well, the overall history, but especially recently, the history of the United States does not create an image of trustworthiness. And again, we go back to all those countries that were persuaded to surrender their weapons of deterrence in exchange for a promise they'd be left alone. And it didn't happen. Syria gave up its just starting nuclear program on the promise they'd be left alone. They got attacked. I'm sorry, that was Libya. Then Iraq gave up their chemical weapons on the promise they wouldn't be attacked. They got attacked. Syria gave up their chemical weapons and so forth and so on. And that's why countries like North Korea are digging their heels in. They know that surrendering their weapons of deterrent is an open door to being invaded, and they don't want to go along with that anymore. Now, oddly enough, over in Ukraine, Ukrainian nationalist Levko Grigorovich Lukyanenko, who's a Russiaphobe, is out there saying that the Syrian jihadists are allies of Ukraine. Classic case of wars making for strange bedfellows. We're going to take a break for commercials, and then when we come back, we've got a phone call. I want to share a quick story. I think I've mentioned this before, so I'll keep it brief. When I was working in Germany, one weekend we decided to get on out into the countryside, and my host took me out to Herrenchiemsee. which is the island palace of Ludwig III of Bavaria, the Mad King of Bavaria. And he built some amazing palaces, including Neuschwanstein, which is that fairy tale castle that Disney copied for their theme parks. You've seen it in all kinds of movies like Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. And while we were there on Aaron Kim's Day, it's an exact copy of the center portion of Versailles. It was never completed because of the death of Ludwig III. But while we were there was another group of Americans from Texas. And to put it bluntly, they were acting like Texans. And I was telling my hosts, just don't tell anybody here I'm from that same country. It was a little embarrassing. But overall, it was very, very pleasant. Unfortunately, what I understand is going on now all over Europe because of the migrant problem is that very wonderful, pleasant experience just probably isn't there anymore. Anyway, Kathleen, thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go, and we're going to switch over to Jim in Montana. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? As a matter of fact, just today, I got a postal letter from a supporter of the show, basically saying they were seeing the same thing, that they were listening to the radio show over the Internet on their cell phone and during lunch break, and their coworkers were coming on out and sitting down to listen with them. And so we are seeing that ordinary America is waking up, and we know that because the audience ratings for corporate media are very low. Trust in the corporate media is at an all-time low. Trust in the government, members of Congress, and the president, all-time low. So slowly but surely we are winning in terms of the American people beginning to understand the true nature of the people who are in our government, that they are not all these superior human beings and saints that we're all supposed to look up to and admire. And again, another parallel with the Soviet Union, the samizdat, the fax machine-based publishing system that the Russian people, the Soviet people, were using to send stories back and forth, did exactly the same thing. So, yeah, it is happening.
Now.
It is happening. It is happening.
Yes, sir. I won't take any more time. I won't take any more of your time. Two more real quick things. What's that? What's it called when you get a bunch of people to put signatures down?
Petition.
And yes, we need to do two petitions for your ideas. For the one for the voting system, how we use the newspapers, and we could follow it all the way through. We need to get a petition for that, and then also the idea that you just stated earlier on the show too, for taxes.
Okay,
anyway,
well,
Michael,
the one about the taxes,
we'll let you go.
The one about the taxes, that was a joke. I don't seriously think we're ever going to see that one.
Oh.
But as far as the voting system,
we may not see.
As far as the voting system is concerned, people need to copy off that article and send it everywhere, because I think Americans are going to be very alarmed that Trump's Honest Elections Commission has now been officially dissolved. And I don't think anybody thinks the Department of Homeland Security is going to do a thing about it. So what we need to do is, first of all, educate the Americans that there is a better way, and that in turn will lead to public pressure to bring about a change. But it's going to be a long, slow process. Okay?
Would a petition help that process go?
No, we need to educate before we can get the signatures on the petition. People don't...
Okay. Okay, thanks.
All right, Jim, thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go, and we're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who have just now rejoined the network. And then we're going to take yet another phone call from Mark in North Carolina. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
SS, from what I understand.
Well, you raise an interesting point here. You raise an interesting point because we've all been raised to look at the SS and the Nazis as the uber villains. But the fact is, during a world war, there's a lot of groups out there doing a lot of evil, and that was true of World War II. In addition to your groups, the Catholics had an organization called the Ustashi, and they were so brutal it even turned the Nazis. The Nazis actually complained and said, "You can't do these things to human beings."
Wow. The Ustashi, I believe, were they Ukrainian or were they?
I think a lot of them were, but they were basically Catholic order.
Okay. Yeah, that's one of the problems today between the two Ukraines. You've got the Russian part of the Ukraine that are Greek Orthodox or Eastern Orthodox, and the other part in the West, for Kiev, are Roman Catholics. And it seems to me like of the two religions, more and more I like the Eastern Orthodox. They really seem to have it together. But the other thing I wanted to mention,
Mark, I have to cut you off. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call. Back with another phone call after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the telephones. Pepe the Frog from Hollywood, probably not the real name. And aloha, Pepe. What's on your mind today?
Feels good, Mike. Aloha. I just wanted to say I'm a computer programmer, and I'm a computer programmer, and I've been working with the Windows and Unix operating systems for about 20 years, give or take. And my peak advice to everyone out there using Windows as their main operating system, you guys are S out of luck, man. Dating back to 4.0 new technology, which is the new technology kernel that Windows uses, it's essentially a giant hybrid kernel attached with all these like architectures and layers and user modes. I'm going too technical, but the NT kernel, starting with 4.0, there was an audit, and essentially there was a public key addressed as the NSA key. And
that was the second key. That was the second key.
Yeah,
and that was
there's two keys. It has a primary key. Sorry, Mike, and it has a secondary key. And it has been openly out there for 20 years. And Windows will never be secure. I mean, just the hardware model and the license model, forget about it. Anyone that uses Windows, just basically use it for simple tasks. Don't really use it for personal, use and putting your private information on it. It's done. I mean, my advice, do not use Windows. Do not use any Intel or AMD processors, period, Mike. Period. Mm-hmm. If you want data integrity, use different systems. Go back to the old days of embedded hardware or even mainframes, for Pete's sakes. I mean, word to everyone listening, computers are not safe. Don't use them with a double-edged sword, knowing that they have a lot of information and it's a great collective memory of knowledge, but be very cautious when you use it for personal use with your social security number, your kids' information. Be careful, Mike, and God bless you, and have a great day.
All right, well, thanks an awful lot, and we're going to let you go here. We touch on these topics from time to time, normally in the third hour. The problem is that all of the major operating systems, including Linux, are now known to be backdoored by CIA and NSA, tremendous waste of time and money, duplication of effort. And people who really need to secure their data are turning to their own encryption. And you'll remember a few years back we did an article, Rivero Challenges the NSA, in which I demonstrated how easy it is for anybody with a little programming knowledge to create a secure code that the NSA cannot break without a great deal of effort. So that's one method. Sometimes if you have the luxury of being able to have a second private computer, that's a good way to go. One of the things that I always look for is an ability to turn off the Wi-Fi port, because a lot of stuff comes over Wi-Fi. But the problem is our computers are insecure because our government, the computer makers, advertisers, all of these people want them to be insecure, to keep a watch on us, to steal our business secrets, to basically scan us for information to sell us more products. And it is a real problem. And certainly the NSA, rather than protecting and guarding the nation's IT security, has left it wide open. And it is a real problem. Again, everybody needs to take responsibility for their privacy, because the government is not the champion of your personal privacy. And that means you have to take the responsibility for learning about how computers work and where these vulnerabilities are, and not just go out on the web and put out all this personal information. And this is especially to young people who are just falling in love with social media, and they're putting up all kinds of pictures and personal information all over the web. There are some nefarious people out there, some of whom don't actually work for the government, and they're going to take that information and they're going to use it against you, blackmailing you, all kinds of things. And again, it almost seems like the system is set up to allow this kind of thing. I remember when webcams first came out, they came with little built-in shutters for privacy. When you weren't using the webcam, you just flip it closed. I haven't seen any new webcams that have that. They're just always watching, and you don't know who's using them to watch. Of course, you can fix that with a Post-it note or a piece of tape. But computers, unfortunately, are indispensable to our lives right now. I couldn't do what I'm doing without these computers. Claire couldn't do the music she's doing without her computers. So it's a reality that we have to interact with them, and they are not secure by design. So just take the responsibility for that here. Okay, getting on back to the international news. Apparently, Russian Army General Yevgeny Marchuk is signaling that the new anti-Russia sanctions introduced by the West are not going to have a significant impact in Moscow's foreign policy. So, for whatever it's worth. Going to take another commercial break. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to do some more news before we go back to the phones here. And there's been an interesting development over at NATO. And apparently, the head of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, was being interviewed last week and came out saying that NATO does not want a new Cold War with Russia, and they're going to make every effort to maintain a political dialogue with Moscow. Now, this is a very subtle change of direction, because up until recently, NATO, being goaded by the United States, has been rattling the sabers very loudly along the border with Russia. And it may be that the NATO nations are remembering just how much the last Cold War cost in money that was taken away from society and poured into these weapons, which ultimately were never really used. And maybe NATO is feeling that the United States has been trying to use NATO as an extension of the United States military, and maybe NATO wants to go its own way. But it is a significant comment saying they don't want a new Cold War. We know that Russia doesn't. Russia doesn't want to spend the money. Russia remembers how the last Cold War is what bankrupted the Soviet Union. Now, of course, the United States is not going to be happy about this. They want an arms race because they want to sell weapons to all those NATO countries. And that may be another factor. The NATO countries may be looking at the weapons being supplied by American defense contractors and realizing they're hideously expensive and they don't really work all that well. Okay, getting on down to Israel and Palestine. Things are still very tense down there following Donald Trump's announcement that he recognizes Israel as, Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. And the Palestinians, of course, were not happy with that. They're refusing Trump's invitation for more peace talks with Israel. And it's easy to understand. The Palestinians' first demand in every previous peace talk was East Jerusalem as the capital of Palestine. And Trump has already taken that off the table. What else is there to talk about? Israel won't remove their illegal settlements. Israel won't stop oppressing the Palestinians. So Donald Trump is out there threatening to stop all financial aid to the Palestinians. And he might go ahead and do it. Or maybe he'll learn a lesson from Pakistan where the threat or the cutting off of funds there has triggered a negative consequence, which is Pakistan pivoting toward China and dropping the U.S. dollar. Now, a lot of people are saying that if the U.S. cuts off funding to the Palestinian Authority is probably going to collapse. And the Palestinian Authority is one of Israel's key means for maintaining its regime of occupation and apartheid. And a lot of Palestinians think that it would be better without the Palestinian Authority and go back to Hamas or unify under Hamas. Now, Israel has always played this little game with Palestine. When Yasser Arafat and the Palestine Liberation Organization were starting to form a consensus, pull Palestine together and unify it. Israel actually started Hamas. It was an operation by Shin Bet to set up a controlled opposition so that Israel could play this little game. We can't have peace talks. We don't know who to talk to. Who's in charge? Is it the PLO or is it Hamas? Then Yasser Arafat was died, probably assassinated, and all of a sudden Hamas found itself the government of Palestine, and they started acting like one. And they were doing a really, really good job. So Israel came on in and helped set up the Palestinian Authority, again, to split the country, split the people, and play that game of we're not sure who to talk to. So if the Palestinian Authority collapses for the funding cut, Hamas is once again going to be in charge of Palestine. Got to think these things all the way through. The protests in Palestine, West Bank, are continuing. 12 Palestinians were killed by Israeli forces in December. And this is all coming out of Donald Trump's proclamation that the U.S. would recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital, which, of course, was roundly condemned in a vote by the United Nations General Assembly. And I'd like to add a comment here. Donald Trump, if he wants to recognize Israel or Jerusalem as Israel's capital, I guess he can, but he doesn't speak for me. Now, story coming out of Electronic Intifada. In fact, I got a few from Electronic Intifada. Is Israel deliberately killing Gaza protesters? And it does seem to be so because they're playing these little games where they'll fire tear gas canisters directly at people's skulls to fracture their skull. They're firing even with the rubber bullets at point-blank range. And the rubber bullets are just rubber-coated. There's still a steel core in there. And there's a story here about a gentleman named Mahmoud. Ran toward the fence separating the Khan Yunis area of Gaza from Israel, and Israel fired tear gas at him, and he was shot in the back by Israeli soldiers, and the soldiers just kept on firing. And they delayed the arrival of medical aid. They just let him die. Another article, Electronic Intifada, wondering if Israel is testing a new type of tear gas in Bethlehem, and pointing out that UNRWA, the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, is saying their research suggests that the town of Aida's residents are exposed to more tear gas than any other population surveyed globally. It's like just part of daily life. Oh, here comes the tear gas again. Now, story in Fars News is saying that what Donald Trump may have really wanted to do with this unpopular announcement to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel is to create a controversy, to distract attention from the growing domestic problems here in the United States of America. This is coming from human rights activist Mike Napier. And he says it's just a distraction. It's just a distraction because things are not really working very well in the United States. And we've seen this pattern before. Remember when Monica Lewinsky was coming out from her testimony about the stained blue dress, came out on the steps of the Capitol building expecting a phalanx of reporters. The steps were empty because while she was inside, Bill Clinton had launched attacks against a suspected biological weapons lab in Yemen and another facility in Syria. Actually, no, the biological weapons lab was in Syria and a mosque in Yemen. And it turned out after the fact that the suspected biological weapons factory was a legitimate pharmaceutical compounding lab. They made aspirin. And the owners of the lab successfully sued the United States of America for the replacement of their property, which means you, the American taxpayer, not only paid for those $1 million-a-shot cruise missiles, you got to pay to build a whole new factory over there. But anything to keep the press from talking to Monica Lewinsky. Now, over in Yemen, Houthi forces have captured a U.S. Navy unmanned underwater vehicle. And there's a video out there where they grabbed this thing and they took it out of the ocean. And the U.S. Navy is admitting it's theirs, but they're saying it was only conducting meteorological research. Really, honest. Because where else would you conduct meteorological research than in a war zone? But this craft is called a Remus 600. It's made by Hydroid, which is a subsidiary of Kongsberg. And apparently it is one of the most sophisticated of these unmanned underwater drones. And so now the Yemenites have that technology, and I'm sure they'll be sharing it with people that the United States prefers that it not be shared with. All right, one more piece of news, then we're going to take a phone call. I know you've been waiting for a while here. Little bit of good news. First of all, as we reported earlier in the week, North Korea and South Korea are now talking over their equivalent of the hotline. Trump is already out there trying to take credit for that, saying it was U.S. pressure that forced North Korea to make the phone call. I don't buy that one either, any more than I buy that the U.S. defeated ISIS and al-Qaeda in Syria. But just one day later, the United States has announced it will delay any more joint military exercises with South Korea until after the Winter Olympics. So they're backing off the saber rattling. The Olympics are going to go ahead. That is a very good thing indeed. Okay, let's talk about the economic news. We still don't have final accurate numbers from the holiday shopping season. We probably won't have those for a couple of weeks. But the overall retail outlook is remaining bleak going into 2018. And the predictions are now there will be 12,000 store closings this year as opposed to 9,000 last year. So retailers are trending down, and I'm sure they're still going to be blaming online sales. But online sales is really just a tiny, tiny fraction of total retail. The problem is the American people are out of money. They don't have disposable income to go down to the stores and buy things. Because under fascism, the money collects at the top and it stays there. And all of the economy under that begins to collapse. Apparently, experts are saying that malls are in trouble. Store closings expected to increase 33% this year, which lines up with the numbers we had in the last story. Shopping malls are interesting places, but you've got to have stores in there, and you've got to have the anchor tenants. Those big department stores are what draw the customers in. So they then wander through the connecting hallways looking at the smaller shops. Anyway, we're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking about the economic news here. And earlier in the show, a gentleman called in about the new GOP tax plan and asking what was it going to do. And I don't really have an answer because I don't think anybody really knows. Because they may cut this tax, then they eliminate this deduction. And it still needs to be sorted out. And it seems that this way it'll be announced that something good is happening, but it doesn't really happen. And a good example can be seen over at the Wendy's hamburger chain, because the minimum wage has gone up for their workers, huzzah, huzzah, but their benefits are being slashed. So in the end, it's a zero-sum deal. A lot of news, a lot of talk, big fight over minimum wage. But in the end, they're not really coming out ahead. They may be getting more in their paycheck, but they're going to have to spend more to cover the benefits that are no longer there. This economy is in serious, serious trouble. Americans are using debt just to try and maintain their standard of living. Most of the holiday season shopping this last year was done on plastic. We have huge numbers of Americans on food stamps. We have all of these massive thousands and thousands of homeless people in city after city after city. Our infrastructure is decayed. You can't look at that and tell me this economy is working, other than for that top 1%. And Ron Paul is out there basically saying something similar. The economic progress under Trump is an illusion. There is a correction or crash coming. Because right now, the stock market is held up with manipulation. We're being lied to about the true scale of unemployment. The dollar is dropping against other currencies. Down in Venezuela, they're now officially bankrupt. They missed their last payment, billions of dollars, and there's $9 billion more due in this year. And there's no way out of this through natural market forces. And here is the ugly reality that people need to think about. Under the system of private central banking, where a privately owned bank literally creates the public currency out of thin air and loans it into circulation, the debt always grows faster than the available money supply. You can never pay it off until the debt crushes everything. No country enslaved to a private central bank evades that final crash. And in the process of the crash, the bankers wind up owning all the real hard assets of the nation and the people. It's a scam. They've been playing it for 300 years. Now, as you know, we're coming up on a royal marriage here. And apparently there's a counselor who has ordered the removal of all homeless from around Windsor Castle and where the wedding is going to take place. And he basically dismissed his action saying, well, these people, they're not really in fact homeless. And if they are homeless, it's a voluntary choice. And, of course, that provoked a huge backlash. We're going to take a break for station identification. We're going to be back with hour number 3 after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Let's talk about immigration, migrants, refugees. As you know, the open borders policy in the EU has resulted in a huge surge of crime. And the attitude of the globalists who are currently in power in many of the European Union member states is, well, just get used to it. It's a small price to pay for the New World Order and the glory of a one world government, blah, 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 blah. Now, London's police commissioner, Cressida Dick, is out there responding to the emergence of rape gangs in Great Britain. And by rape gangs, we're not just talking about gangs who go out and rape, but the so-called grooming gangs that will literally go on out and grab hold of young girls, young boys, and turn them into prostitutes. And the commissioner of the Metropolitan Police is out there saying, well, this has been around all the time. I don't know why you're making such a big deal about it now. And, of course, he's lying through his teeth, because if this had, in fact, been going on for centuries, as he said, you would read about it from the British writers, going back to Chaucer, who wrote about conditions on the ground. You'd read about it from Dickens, or from political controversies of bygone ages. There's not a single mention. This is a brand new phenomenon in the streets of Great Britain, and it came in through those open borders. And the end result is massive numbers of British girls being raped and forced into prostitution by organized gangs. This is organized crime. And the perpetrators are the refugees, and the victims are the indigenous. Meanwhile, up in the Netherlands, apparently setting cars on fire has become a fashionable form of acting out by frustrated migrants who made the trip up to Europe with promises of all kinds of free stuff they were going to get, free homes and government care, and it didn't work out. And thousands of cars are being burned. 3,000 last year. And they're all intentionally lit. They cost an average of 10,000 euros per car, and the total losses are in the tens of millions of euros per year. Now, despite laws being passed in many of those countries saying that the media could not identify the immigration status or ethnicity of arrested suspects, the word has gotten out. And now even Germany's government has come on out with a report confirming the refugees are responsible for a surge in violent crime. And this, of course, is leading to more people to call for Angela Merkel to change Germany's immigration policy or step down. And I can certainly understand that. As I've mentioned many times before, I have very fond memories of Germany from the 1980s. It was a wonderful place filled with wonderful people. And some of them were immigrants from other countries. But they had integrated into the society, and they were wonderful people. And I really loved being there. I was actually offered a permanent job for the production company where I was setting up the animation system. I came this close to saying yes. It was that nice a place. I hope it's still there, but it doesn't sound like it. Meanwhile, phony Tony Blair is urging Jeremy Corbyn to hold secret meetings with the EU to stop Brexit. And Tony Blair's theory is that the European Union is now so afraid that Brexit is actually going to happen, they might pull back and make some concessions that would make it advantageous for Britain to remain. And again, Blair is out there, along with the other Remainers, trying to overturn the will of the people, to undermine democratic processes in Great Britain. Now, as you know, as of the first of the year, California officially became a sanctuary state. And I love those humorous signs that are being put up along the highway about welcome felons, MS-13. But the Director of Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, Homan, is out there saying, we've got to take these sanctuary cities on, and I assume by extension states. We've got to take them to court and start charging some of these politicians with crimes. And he's absolutely correct. These politicians are all in violations of various sections of Title VIII, which carry prison time. And when you look at the sheer numbers of illegal rented lips, Rivero speaks, take two. If you look at the sheer number of illegal immigrants being aided, sheltered, and abetted by these politicians, that's a lot of counts. These open border politicians are looking at serious jail time, possibly longer than they're going to live. And it's really very angering to live in a society with very selective enforcement of the laws. I mean, Jeff Sessions, he's announced and he's on the warpath. He's going to get those weed heads. He's unleashed the federal prosecutors to go into states where marijuana is now legal and enforce the federal laws. We're going to get those. Hillary betraying the nation? Nah, no big deal. Sanctuary states, open borders? Nah, no big deal. But we'll get the weed heads. Now, James Woods, and he's an actor, and it's unfortunate he always plays characters that you don't want to like, because he's actually a nice guy, and he's very intelligent. And he's out there saying the Democrats are promoting this invasion of illegals into this country in the hopes that just 10% will then be persuaded to vote illegally. And 10% of that volume of illegal immigrants can swing any election. And we still don't know how many illegals voted in last year's primaries and the general election, because of this nonsense that requiring a voter to show an ID is somehow racist. When you get pulled over by a traffic cop and he wants to see your driver's license, is that being racist? When you show your ID to buy tobacco or alcohol, is that being racist? Of course not. But James Woods is absolutely right. the Democrats are dependent on illegal immigrants voting illegally to steal elections. Another article over an Investment Watch blog that by declaring itself a sanctuary state, California seems to be on the path to actual secession from the Union. So we'll see what happens with that. Now, if you're like me, you have been appalled over the last several years at how the liberal snowflakes have gone after free speech on college campuses, because they don't want to be triggered, they don't want to be offended, and we don't want to hear things that we don't want to hear, and they've succeeded in persuading the administration of many colleges and universities to have what are called free speech codes, which limit topics, limit words. In other words, speech is no longer free. It's not free speech, it's permitted speech. And most importantly, the free speech zones. You're allowed to go out to this little fenced-off area out past the teacher's parking lot, and you can scream anything you want about the wars and the economy. But when you're out of that little cage, you have to behave. And for people who are my age, you probably realize what a change that is. When I went to college, it was supposed to be a place where new ideas were openly discussed and evaluated. After all, we were the new up-and-coming young generation. It was only a matter of time before we were running the nation, and we had to decide what we were going to do with it. Now, apparently, in an article in Breitbart News, there is some new legislation that is being considered that will basically ban the idea of campus free speech zones and codes and restore the First Amendment to our colleges and universities. And I think that would be a really good idea. Because one of the things I noticed with all these free speech zones and free speech codes is the liberals could still say whatever they wanted, anytime they wanted, anywhere on campus. It was conservatives, or just anybody the liberals found offensive, that were being silenced. It was not a fair and just open policy. Now, as you know, there is this nasty flu, and it's going around. The current flu shot does not cover it. Apparently, it's certainly all over Oahu. It's spreading all over the United States. And it's a big problem in Great Britain. And apparently, Britain's National Health Service has announced it is canceling all routine operations until February, saying that all non-emergency procedures have to be delayed because the flu outbreak has left the hospitals overcrowded, underfunded. Apparently, the hallways are jammed with people. So that's how serious this really is. I'm on the very tail end of it. Claire is still dealing with it, but appears to be getting better. Cross my fingers. She has to go get an x-ray tomorrow. But it's a nasty one. Article coming out, again, of Investment Watch blog. It's like they want people to suffer. And we have another example of big pharma greed. And it involves a drug used for a very rare condition called periodic paralysis. It actually used to be free. It's now costing $100,000 a year. And part of the problem is that pharmaceutical companies devote less time on research on new drugs, and they acquire other companies' drugs, at which point they'll raise the price. And this drug's ownership is, let me see, what was it called? Basically, this drug's ownership has changed hands many, many times. The drug was originally called Daranide. It came from Merck. It was discontinued in the early 2000s, and people who had the paralysis had to buy it from overseas. Then in 2008, a generic drug maker acquired the rights to the medication with the aim of making it available at a reasonable price, and that was because a family member of the owner of the industries was afflicted by the illness. So that was good news. Then Sun Pharmaceutical Industries took over Taro and had the drug reapproved by the FDA as a rare disease treatment for those with periodic paralysis. They gave it a new name, Kevayis, and also a new price, $13,000 for a bottle of 100 pills. And because of the new FDA approval, they had 7 years of exclusive marketing rights. Medicine is not about healing. It's not about care. It's about big money. And they are exploiting people's pain and suffering to loot and plunder them. It's shameful. It's very shameful. I remember when I was a kid, there was a brief moment where I seriously thought about maybe being a doctor, which my mother certainly encouraged, but another path not taken. So let's talk about human-caused global warming. Insert ominous music here. More than 2,700 flights have been canceled. Schools are shut down. Drivers are being told to stay home as this intense bomb cyclone bears down on the northeast after coming up the coast from the southeast and Florida. Now, you're going to see the word bomb all over the place. It's not being used for dramatic effect. It's actually a term that denotes a storm system that causes the air pressure to fall 24 millibars in less than 24 hours. That's how powerful the storm is, and it's still evolving and changing. And I've got family in New England. They've been sending me pictures all day. They're all, at home, staying warm, keeping the driveway shoveled out. In fact, one of my relatives just said the snow just stopped, and they've only got about an hour to shovel it before it turns into glare ice. So they're out there working to do that. They had 18 inches of snow in Boston. More cold weather and snow records are being smashed all over that part of the country. Up at Niagara Falls, that's turning into this winter wonderland. Now, the falls are still flowing, but the top is frozen over. And the water, as it flies out from the falls, the mist, everything it touches, it freezes instantly, forming ice crystals. So it's actually quite beautiful, although I think you'd have to be very cautious about being out there. But right now, 92% of the country is below freezing. Now, of course, we have snow here in Hawaii up on the tops of Mauna Loa, Mauna Kea, and Haleakala. So at this point, I think all 50 states have snow somewhere in them. Now, earlier we reported that Massachusetts beaches were being hit, if you will, with sharks that are frozen solid. They're literally freezing solid out there in the ocean and just washing ashore. And there is a huge buildup of ice off the coast, especially of Hingham, Weymouth, and Winthrop. And the Coast Guard is having to be out there with icebreakers trying to break the ice up and keep it from forming a solid mass. So that is definitely very intense. Another problem they're dealing with is that because of that sudden drop in air pressure, it's leading to a very high storm surge. So this ice-cold freezing water is coming ashore across the beaches, across the roads in some parts of New England. So this is a bad one. This is a bad one. Apparently, down in Florida, Georgia, the coastal South was hit with the most snow in nearly 3 decades. Now, up in Baltimore, for some reason, many of the schools stayed open. And the kids managed to get there, but the schools have no heat because of the deteriorated status of the schools themselves. Apparently, in one school, a frozen water pipe burst, resulting in the flooding of a classroom and an office and the destruction of school materials. But these indoor temperatures barely above freezing, these kids are having to do their schoolwork in their parkas, in their mittens, in their gloves. And as we mentioned yesterday, it's snowing in Florida's capital for the first time since 1989. So this cold wave is tightening its grip on the U.S., and we're just getting started into the winter. Apparently, the Florida Sun Coast, that's the western coast on the Gulf, is under a freeze warning again. Now, thankfully, it's a little early in the year, or we might be looking at some major losses to Florida's citrus crops with a resulting increase in prices at the store. And Dutch climate carbonazis still out there pushing it. Human-caused global warming, the ocean is rising, and they're responding to the claim that nobody is seeing the ocean rise anywhere by saying, well, actually the floor of the oceans are sinking under the weight of all that water. They're still grasping at this thing. Meanwhile, over in Germany, in all of December, the country saw only 10 hours of sun. So their solar power alternative didn't really produce anything. And again, that's one of the big issues with this Carbonazi call to end fossil fuels. They cannot come up with a reliable, efficient, attractive alternative. They just want to ban oil and gas, huzzah, huzzah. Something will come along. Something always comes along. All right, we're going to be taking another break for commercials. When we come on back, news about computers, computer users, a lot of interesting things going on there, so stay tuned. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Before we get into computers, I was checking up on the world of Steve Bannon, and he's definitely not having a good time right now. Apparently, the comments section over at Breitbart, the commenters are just ripping him apart for his quotes coming from the book Fire and Fury. And apparently the owners of Breitbart are already talking about whether he should be fired or not. And I think they'll come to the conclusion that, yes, he's destroyed the brand with this. And part of me feels a little sorry for Steve Bannon. I've never seen a man self-destruct quite so fast. And it seems that saying what he said in the interview was ill-considered. Trying to make nice after Trump reacted to it wasn't going to play to anybody. And so, yeah, I think from the heights of the White House down to working at Wendy's, I don't know. All right, let's talk about computers. File this one under irony or maybe karma. Apparently, there's been a data breach over at the Department of Homeland Security. And pretty much every one of their employees had their personal details compromised. Now, apparently, they discovered the breach last May as part of an ongoing criminal investigation. And the agency is describing it as a privacy incident. So, wow. Department of Homeland Security can't even protect their own computers. Now, let's see. In May of last year, think of all the months that whoever got this information has been able to steal from the DHS employees. It's amazing. All right, let's get back to this hardware bug. People are still reacting to it. And basically, to recap for those who missed the story before, Intel has acknowledged that their computer chips are affected by a bug that makes them vulnerable to hacking. And the reason this is so important is this bug is burned into the chip itself. And apparently this bug or flaw goes back 10 years. I think it's a legitimate question. Is it a bug? Is it a design flaw? Or is it a mandated NSA backdoor? And this bug allows software to gain access to the most protected part of the computer's memory, the kernel memory, where things like passwords are being stored. And that is supposed to be a section of memory that it's impossible to get to. But with this bug / backdoor in the hardware, it's possible. And the implications of this are staggering. It's affected every product with an Intel chip, Windows machines, some of the iOS machines. And Microsoft is rushing out a patch, but on some machines, lower-end machines, there's going to be a performance hit of up to 30% to deal with this issue. Now, Microsoft is saying that when you go to install these patches, you may need to keep an eye on your antivirus, which is going to be looking for anything attempting to write that deeply into the operating system. So you're going to have to look at that. Now, we've been talking about the loss of net neutrality and what it means for the Internet, and we're already seeing the beginnings of communities starting to fight back. Over in Fort Collins, Colorado, the City Council just voted to move ahead setting up a municipal fiber broadband network that will provide gigabit speeds. And apparently when they announced they were going to do this, the local cable industry went to court to try and stop it, to say, we have a monopoly on Internet. Well, no, nobody really does. Anybody can set up an Internet. And so the City Council vote came on in after the residents of Fort Collins approved a ballot question that authorized the city to build a broadband network. The ballot question didn't guarantee the network would be built because council approval was required, which they got last night. That hurdle is now cleared. And so they're going to be moving ahead with it. The vote was 7-0. It was unanimous to get this going. And the whole point of this network, it'll be net neutral, all traffic handled equally, gigabit speeds. I think more cities need to do this. There is no law that says only the big cable TV companies and ISPs are allowed to build internets. That's like saying only Sears is allowed to make hammers. It's out there. And again, when I was working in San Francisco on Day After Tomorrow, there were a group of enthusiasts setting up a citywide Wi-Fi network for school children to use who did not have broadband in their home. It can be done. It's not even that expensive. All right, we got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back. Join us for some news to fit in here before the end of the program. So thank you very much. And for the support. We appreciate it. We really do. Okay, getting on back to that Intel chip, another article just came on out. This is in the Daily Mail in Great Britain, and basically they're saying literally billions of people worldwide are at risk from hackers because these Intel chips with this burned into the metal back door, they're used in smartphones, tablets, baby monitors, television sets, obviously computers, and they can expose your personal data to criminals. And apparently there's two different variations of this bug or backdoor. One is called Meltdown, the other one's called Spectre. And between them, they can let cyber criminals steal passwords and other data from nearly every device containing chips from Intel, AMD, and ARM, thanks to quote-unquote design flaws in their manufacture. I really wonder if this was a mandated backdoor, because when they first started coming out with backdoors, they started high level, like in Windows NT with the NSA key. But then they realized computer users were going to find that stuff and block it. And there were successive backdoors that were found and blocked. But if you burn it right into the hardware, then people can't see it. They can't find it. This is a real mess. This is a real mess. I'm expecting, especially Intel's stock price, to plummet from this. And again, I think part of the problem is we've allowed these systems to become really too complicated, too decadent. When that caller called in about how Windows was laid out, what I don't think he understands is that software produced by large corporations echoes the corporate structure, because the software development is broken up into departments and teams, and everybody's supposed to come together at the interface, but one side doesn't know what the other side is doing. Some of the best designed software I've ever seen, and I'll give you one good example. Claire's music scoring software, for most of its life until its recent sale, was programmed by a company owned by 2 programmers, and they did most of the coding. They had a very small coding staff, and the software works great. The larger the company, the larger the software, the more problems there are going to be. Microsoft is huge, and everything they put out has thousands of bugs. Anyway, we've been talking about how the corporate social media like Facebook, YouTube, are starting to alienate their users with very open, blatant censorship. Facebook is flat out refusing to explain why certain accounts are being deleted and certain other accounts are being left alone. And people are turning off Facebook, they're turning off YouTube, they're going over to the new up-and-coming alternatives, which, at least for now, still respect the First Amendment right to freedom of expression. DuckDuckGo grew 55% in 2017. That is an astonishing growth rate. And DuckDuckGo is a search engine. It's a competitor to Google. It's not as capable of Google, but it respects your privacy, and it gives you honest results without filtering. And that's why people are switching over. Now, remember the brouhaha over Apple being caught slowing down older iPhones with the claim it was to lengthen battery life. And people aren't believing that. They're convinced that hardware and software vendors will deliberately cripple or degrade older hardware, older cuts of software to encourage people to buy the newer software, which you can get away with in a healthy economy when people have the money to buy this year's version of XYZ. In the current economy, people want to hang on to their phones as long as possible. They want to hang on to their software as long as possible. And they get very upset when the people they bought that product from are tinkering with it to make it perform more poorly. So Apple is coming on out. They're trying to calm everybody down by discounting the cost of a replacement battery. It's now estimated that this move will cost Apple $10 billion in lost sales over this issue. A lot of people are now looking at products other than the iPhone. Backing up to something that we talked about earlier in the show, RestoreAmericanGlory.com is running the story that the FBI believed crimes were committed by Hillary Clinton and her aides. Now, this is sourced from The Hill. And again, I know we've touched on this from some other sources. Republicans seated on congressional investigation committees have found in writing, in actual official documents, irregularities and contradictions in that original FBI investigation. And basically, insiders told The Hill it's becoming even clearer that the former Secretary of State literally received a get-out-of-jail-free card from the FBI on her way to becoming the Democratic nominee for president in 2016. Now, we're hearing that Hillary and her associates are just in a tizzy at the threat that this email investigation is going to be reopened. I can almost see Hillary Clinton out there on TV saying, "Feel sorry for me. My home just burned down. Why are you doing this now?" And by the way, as an update on that, I looked into it. The Clintons' actual home was not touched by the fire. The fire broke out on the second floor of the building that was constructed to house the Secret Service. And apparently the Secret Service put the fire out with fire extinguishers before the fire department got there. So it wasn't all that big a deal. And obviously it's going to inconvenience the Secret Service. but it wasn't that bad a fire. So you don't need to feel sorry for the Clintons over their Chappaqua home. Because you know how much I love science. Apparently, there's been a breakthrough in the DNA typing of ancient Americans, and they found a body of a 6-week-old Native American who died 11,500 years ago, and analysis of the DNA is rewriting the history books. And it's showing that the first humans arrived in the Americas in one migration more than 25,000 years ago, and then split into 3 ancestral Native American groups. So forget about that guy Columbus. He didn't discover the New World. These people did. And this puts the earliest humans in the Americas back much, much longer than previously had been thought, which certainly explains how they got that far south in South America in such a short time, because that had always been considered an historical contradiction, going from the previously assumed date of humans arriving in North America over the land bridge from Siberia. It was questioned, how could they get into South America that quickly and start to build civilizations? Well, they were here a lot earlier. In fact, 25,000 years sounds like the land bridge that would have existed before the start of the last great ice age. So the numbers start to work out.
This is William, hopefully your favorite videographer from Two Hats Publishing. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like it, please leave comments below, or like, follow, or subscribe to us and get notices of all our videos. We love it, even when you call.